Welcome, Life Sciences, to yet another exciting life science lesson. We are busy journeying through the series Microorganisms. If you have been following the series, we started off with viruses, looking at the impact that viruses had, the structure, the characteristics, and then the next one after that, we looked at bacteria and all the structure, the characteristics, and the different diseases that we're going to find in the microorganism called bacteria. And today we're going to look at a kingdom of microorganisms called Protista. Protista, or with an A, or protists, right? Any which way you would be correct when you did that. Okay, this is a bit of a weird kingdom for me. I kind of call it the file 13 kingdom, and what I mean by that is it's got two distinctive characteristics. It's kind of like on one side, it's the beginning of the plant kingdom, right, where we're going to step up if we look at when we look at our different kingdoms, going into the plant biodiversity, or it's one of the sections that is going to come in the next couple of lessons. And on the other side, belonging to this group is this whole weird animal kind of group, right? But we're going to get into those things later. So the question that I did ask you is that when we look at this concept of a plant kingdom and animal kingdom, these guys are what are the starters, and often when we talk about evolution, we use the word common ancestors. And what we mean is they, like the very simple, complex ones, that kind of gave rise to the more complex, all right, plants and animals that are going to follow that. When we have a look at the board, when we have a look at our mind map, right, we follow the same procedure when we look at microorganisms. What do you need to know about the protists? The first thing, what are their characteristics? In other words, what makes them, right, or what points, little boxes do we tick that are very specific to this kingdom, to these organisms, right, that put them in the protist kingdom. Remember, though we're looking at microorganisms, each of them, and not viruses because they were not living, bacteria belong to the kingdom Monera, right? We're looking at microorganisms that belong to the kingdom Protista. We are then looking at a specific structure, right? What do they look like? How are we going to be able to identify them? And as I said here, it's going to be quite diverse in that we're looking at some plant-like and then some animal-like. And then each time we study a microorganism, we need to look at a disease. And the disease that we're going to look at when it comes to protist, we're going to look at malaria. And when we look at the disease, we look at the effect that it has and how are we going to be able to manage that disease. Right, so guys, on the board, as always, there are lots of words, terms that are new to you to this section. Right, as I said, I'm not going to go through each one of them as a word, but take a note, jot it down, right, and then go and check in your notes, go and check in your textbook. These are the words that you need to be able to use biologically. Do I know what they are? Do I know how to put it into a specific context? Do I know the meaning of that word? Okay, guys, so let's start off with, right, the characteristics. Now, if we have a look at the characteristics, right, we are looking at, what we're looking at is what makes these organisms, right, part of this kingdom. Now, we've dealt with this concept quite often, and this is one concept, all protists. Now, remember I said to you, we are going to see both animal and plant. All of the protists are eukaryotes. Guys, and when we look at a eukaryote, what are we looking at? We're looking at a plant or an animal cell, okay, that both have a nuclear membrane, unlike the bacteria, and they've also got a whole host of membrane-bound structures. They could have ER, they could have Golgi apparatus, they could have mitochondria. In the plants, they could have chloroplasts. So we're looking at a cell, right, that has a far more complex structure than we were looking at bacteria. Very important, guys, they live in water, all right? They must live in somewhere moist. They are not adapted to live on land and usually produce asexually. What does that mean? They do not need a male or a female, right? We usually, by a process called mitosis or cloning, and they make an identical copy of each other. Now, as I said to you, when it comes to protists, those things are common to all of protists, regardless of whether you are animal-like or plant-like. Right, now let's going to get into the differences. And the differences are sometimes quite extreme. Right? That's why I say to you, it fits in there's a lot of right characteristics that could fit into these criteria. Now, the first one, for example, is the opposite extremes. They can be microscopic, because remember, we are looking at microorganisms, or they can be huge, right? They could be 100 meters long. And what we're talking about over here, you're going to see what falls into this category is going to be seaweed, right? Very often people think, right, that seaweed is a plant. It is not. Okay, what else do they vary with? Right, so some of them are autotrophic. And if they're autotrophic, that means they can make their own food. All right, they make their own food. But on the other hand, right, some of them are going to be heterotrophic. They need to eat. Right, and usually what's going to happen is we're going to see that those that can make their own food are going to fall under the more plant-like, all right, protists, and those that need to eat are going to fit under the animal-like protists. Okay, guys, so let's start off when we use the word plant-like. Now, all of the plant-like protists, we give a name, and that is called algae, right? Algae belong to the kingdom protists. And what are the characteristics of algae? Let's have a look. All right. First of all, they have chlorophyll. So algae, all right, are usually going to be green. There are other ones like red and a brown, but they all have the basis, right, of chlorophyll and can photosynthesize. And you're going to see that they're going to be really, really important, right, in aquatic food chains. That is in the water. They're going to be food for a lot of the fish and the some of the larger organisms that are in water. Okay, guys, they float. What does that mean? They are not plants. They don't have roots. They do not have roots to keep them, all right, anchored in the soil. They are going to float in water. And as we said before, they are going to reproduce asexually. What they're usually going to do is this, they're just going to divide. We don't have a male and we don't have a female. So we don't see typically male type algae and female type algae. All right, guys, have a look at the different kinds of structures. Right, these little round ones are really cool. Remember, see here? These are unicellular algae. Now, these are all one single cell, right? And these are called diatoms. And as I said, they got green, they can photosynthesize, they got chlorophyll, right? And they actually got a really nice hard coat over here called silica, right? And we often use silica when we build. This little guy is quite interesting. He is one cell, all right, and then they joined to each other. So it's one like photofilm, right? So it's got all these ones and they make like one strip. And he gets his name Giardia. Can you see the chlorophyll? It's in a spiral form. Can you see the green? Really quite funky, right? So it's in a spiral form, right? That's all the cytoplasm and the vacuole to keep it nice and floating. But it's got that typical, I think it's such a nice name, Giardia, right? The spiral chloroplasts. And each of these are one single cell. Even though they are joined together, the one cell is not technically reliant on the others. That one cell, right, is a simple unicellular cell and can work all by itself. Okay, so that's the first one, microscopic, nice and small. But on the other hand, we've got seaweed. Now, seaweed, as I said to you, are not part of the plant kingdom, guys. They don't have roots, they don't have stems, they don't have leaves. I know that looks like that's roots, it's stems, and it's leaves, but it's actually not. It's just multicellular. It's a mass of cells, right? We don't see, if you can remember when you might have done plant tissue, you're not going to see xylem, you're not going to see phloem, you're not going to see parenchyma, sclerenchyma. All of those kind of secondary tissues here. So what they are, they're large masses of floating tissue, and these, as I said to you, right, are multicellular, large, lots of them together. They float, they photosynthesize, but they are not part of the plant kingdom. Right, now the animal ones. The animal part of protists are called protozoans. That's really important and sometimes a bit of a difficult word, right? So when we had the plant-like, that was algae. All the animal ones are called protozoans. Now, guys, this is where they are very different to plants. They are only unicellular, right? They are not, right, multicellular at all. They are microscopic. We cannot see them. They're little animal-like things, and when they're animals, right, they cannot make their own food, and they need to eat. And that's what they spend most of their time doing. They need to swim around or to move, and they need to get the food. Whereas the algae part, chlorophyll, they could photosynthesize. These little guys, all right, need to get to where they need to go so that they were able to get food. Right? These are the groups that we are looking at when we get to these animal ones. This is an amoeba, all right, and what an amoeba is, it's an animal cell. It's a single animal cell. So here's a cell membrane, all right, and inside we're going to see a nucleus and the vacuole, but because it's an animal cell, and that, remember when you looked at cells, animal cells don't have that restrictive cell wall, and the cytoplasm can change from a more like jelly hard to a water. And basically what these guys do is they slide along with these projections. The cytoplasm like slinks along, and that is how they're going to find their food. And they're like put like these, they're called pseudopodia, false feet, around what they're eating, and they bring it up, and then they're going to digest, all right? Those are called the amoeboid cells. These guys over here are called ciliates. Now these little cilia, they move. Little cilia are hair-like structures, right? So they move, they vibrate, and because of that, those guys can swim, all right? Those are your ciliates. These are your Giardia. Now your Giardia, you can see, they've got like these little flagella, right? Little tails as well. And they are also able to move and swim around and go and find little things to eat. So you've got your amoeboid that slinks around, your cilia that's got all these little hairs beating that gets it on its way, and your Giardia over here, right, which have got all these tails and are going to get it to move. Now the next group don't move. All right, and these are your parasites, and this is the one that we are really going to look at. And the most important little guys that don't move, we call them a plasmodium, right? And the plasmodium are these guys over here. They see they're darker than the rest of them. Now they don't move at all, right? But they need to feed, and these are parasites. And when we use the term parasite, a parasite is going to imply that it needs a living host and that it actually is going to cause harm. If you look at the whole concept of symbiosis that we looked at, right, parasitism, one organism is going to gain and the other one is going to be harmed. And this is the malaria plasmodium. And this is the one we're going to look at, right, when we look at the malaria. Now, also in this group of protists are really important little microorganisms called plankton. And I'm sure some of you might have watched little Finding Nemo or what those kind of cartoons where the whales ate the plankton. And again, what the plankton are little microscopic structures that form the base of a lot of aquatic food chains. They are eaten, by a lot of organisms in the water, by fish, by the whales, they're also fish, by lots of turtles and all of those kind of animals that are going to live in the ocean. They're going to form a huge, important part, of the ecosystem when we come to the food chains. And again, we're going to see that there are more plant-like plankton and there are going to be these more animal-like plankton. Now, the plant-like plankton are called phytoplankton. And as you can see over here, they are all these unicellular structures. Even those chains, they are all unicellular structures. And they are eaten by a lot of aquatic animals because that's where they're going to get their food. Because as you can see, they're green, and that green means they can photosynthesize. So they are making starch. They are making energy. The animal type ones, zoo, let me just change my color of my pen quickly. Zooplankton. And that's what animals are. Animals belong in a zoo. And if we have a look at these creatures, you can see they are microscopic, they are unicellular, and what they do is they are going to form the basis, again, of a lot of the food chains in the aquatic environment. So you've got the algae, which form part of the plants. You form the protozoas, which are part of the animal-like. And then you've got this group called plankton, where you've got the plant ones, which are called phytoplankton, and you've got the more animal-like structures called zooplankton. Okay, guys, that's all we've got for now. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll see you right back after this. Welcome back, Life Sciences. I hope you had a quick little break. We had a little bit to snack on, a little bit of water, get all your energy levels up. Remember, we are looking at the concept of microorganisms, really, really small, organisms, micro meaning really small, microscopic needing a microscope, but these guys have a really, really big impact. When we looked at our first lesson, we looked at viruses, and we looked at the disease, quite a few diseases, and one of them was HIV, It was quite prolific in our country. And then when we looked at bacteria, we looked at TB, Now when we look at our protists, now remember our protists, as I just explained to you, have a plant side, called algae, and an animal side called protozoans. And we're going to concentrate on the protozoan, especially a little organism called a plasmodium that is going to be the cause of probably the third biggest killer in our country is malaria. As I say to you, HIV, TB, malaria, three of those diseases, all caused by microorganisms, and all have a huge big effect, on our economy. So when we look at the disease now, we're going to look at the malaria, what it's caused, what its effects, and how we're going to treat it. Every single time we do that, remember, what is its effects, what is the symptoms, and how are we going to manage it. That's really important, right, when you look at each of the diseases. Now, as I said to you, a few key words that we are going to talk about. Just make sure that you pay attention, right? Highlight those words so that you know you need to be able to use them biologically and appropriately. You need to, right, use them in the right frame. Okay, guys, so when we look at malaria, now, one of the things I need you to, one of the misconceptions is that very often you think it's the mosquito, right? The mosquito is just a carrier. I'm going to draw a little basic life cycle for you just now. But if we have a look at the map over here and we look at where malaria is, all right, the cases of malaria are the highest, we're going to notice if we draw a line through there, that is going to be the equator. And those of you who are geography students, all right, what you know is mosquitoes breed in areas where it's warm and it's moist, all right? So we're looking at what we call tropical conditions. So if we look at our map again, we're going to notice very little transmissions up top here in the northern hemisphere, basically because it's too cold, right? And mosquitoes don't breed where it's going to be too cold. So we're looking at an area, right, where it's the equator, as I said, where conditions are warm, they're moist, and they're ideal for the mosquitoes to breed. Now, as I say to you, it's not the mosquito, right, that is the problem, but it's the plasmodium is going to be inside the mosquito. Okay, so how does it work? All right, guys, now if you have a look here, it's the female mosquito, right? The female mosquito. She's the one that's going to be, right, the problem maker. And the reason for this is as follows. The female needs blood, right, the iron, etc., in the red blood cells to be able to feed her eggs. Right? Remember, females are going to lay eggs. So the female mosquito, the female, is going to need to drink blood to be able to for her nutrition for her developing eggs. All right. The male mosquitoes, they're actually quite a bit of pollinators. They're going to have nectar, they're going to flowers, etc. So they're not the problem. So what happens is I'm going to draw a little bit of a life cycle for you over here. So guys, do not laugh at my mosquito, all right? I'm going to draw something that looks like that. Okay, this is my mosquito. Yes, I know it looks more like than a moth. Now, what we're going to do is that mosquito, right, what she's got inside of her is she's got these parasites inside of her already. And what they do is you don't have to worry about all the details and the names. But what they ultimately do is they go and these little parasites sit in her salivary glands. Right? They're waiting. Now, what does she do? She needs to get blood. So she goes and she sits on a human, all right, and she injects that little, like proboscis, a little part that's going to suck the blood, and in there are the little plasmodium, the parasites. And as she sucks the blood, all right, those little plasmodiums go into the human. Okay. Now where they? I'm going to put them here. They go into the blood. So she had it. It's not the mosquito. They're little parasites inside her. She goes and she bites somebody. She puts it into the blood, and they now go into the bloodstream. And they go and they sit in this beautiful big organ, right, called the liver. And that's where they start to sit. All right, so what they start to do is, they come into the body, they go into, and they kind of like incubate into the liver. And what they eventually do, and as you can see, when they are inside the liver, one of the things that could happen when somebody could have malaria is something called jaundice. And jaundice is when people go, it's called yellow jaundice. They kind of go yellowish, their eyes and that, because their liver is not working properly, right? Not taking out all the toxins, and a lot of the poisons in that kind of infiltrate the blood because the liver has been damaged by the malaria. So what happens is the following. The little plasmodium that are in the liver, now go out of the liver and they go back into the bloodstream. Now they're very, very careful. All right, now they're very, very clever. What they do is they go into a red blood cell. Right, so what they do is they go and they attack the red blood cell and they actually kill it. And they're quite clever because then they actually, in the red blood cell, they've taken out all the iron, they've killed the red blood cell. Anemia, lack of iron is one of the side effects. But what they do is this red blood cell, as they're going through the blood system, your body doesn't actually recognize them at first because they've got the red blood cell around them. It's almost like they're in camouflage and your body doesn't do anything about them yet, Why? Because they're in disguise, They're in disguise. Obviously, once your immune system is triggered, that there are these parasites in your body, so the symptoms, etc., are going to start to show. So guys, so what happens then if they're in your blood again? So if the mosquito comes down and sucks up your blood and you've got those malaria parasites, that's how she can become infected, Just remember, it's not the mosquito, it's the plasmodium, the parasite inside. Okay, so guys, if we have a look here, so once these plasmodium are in the body, they're going to have all of these symptoms, A lot of them are very similar to the flu, because they've got headaches, you've got fever, you're tired because your red blood cells have been destroyed. You could feel aches and pains, Very serious ones can cause serious brain damage and die, That's why it's really important. But you feel it, you're sick, you're not well, you're lethargic, you're tired, you don't feel like working, you don't feel like going to school, and that could have an effect. As we can see, it has an effect on the economy. If you don't go to work, you're maybe not getting paid. If you don't go to school, maybe you're not passing. If you're not passing, you don't get a good school report. If you don't get a good school report, maybe you can't get into university. You can't get into university, maybe you don't get a good job, etc. So, the repercussions can be quite severe. Okay, so how do we manage it? How do we manage it? Our biggest areas are north in Limpopo. That's where we have, the most cases of malaria, because up in the northern province, Limpopo area there, as I said, nice, moist, tropical areas, ideal for mosquitoes. So one of the ways in which that we do is spray with DDT. Now, DDT has been banned in a lot of countries, but we do use it because it has shown to be very effective, when it comes to spraying of houses, spraying of settlements, etc., to try and get rid of the mosquitoes. So the problem is, because it's a parasite, and it stays inside the mosquito, we actually have to come up with ways to get rid of the mosquito, or stop the mosquito from biting us. So the first one, we spray, we kill the mosquitoes. That's one way which we can do it. The second way is we need to stop mosquitoes from biting us. And these are what we call ITNs, They are insecticide-treated nets. And what we mean by that is, the insecticide Insecticides kill insects. That's what they're going to do. They kill insects. So they're going to kill the mosquito. But if you have a look at this lady, all right, what's going to happen is it's also going to stop the mosquito from coming into, all right, into her room, coming there and biting either of them. So that it has a barrier method, all right, but they're also treated with insecticide that then kills the mosquito as well. There are lots of other ways that we can stop it. I don't know about you. Maybe you have spray. Maybe you burn something, right? Wearing long sleeves, long clothes, preventing the mosquitoes from biting you, right? Another way is sometimes if you know that you're going into an area, right, where there are a lot of mosquitoes and the area is, right, known for malaria, then maybe you can have what is called a prophylactic. They're medicines that you can take to prevent, all right, from malaria, prevent you from getting malaria, etc. So what we do is we've got to try and get rid of the mosquito all we can, okay, or we can stop the mosquito from biting us, trying to get them to stop biting. Okay, so one of the things you also need to do is we need to diagnose very quickly. So if we know that we have malaria, we need to get to a doctor so the doctor can treat us. And as I said, it's very tricky because it's the same symptoms and the same signs that we often see when we think we've just got a cold, right, or we've just got flu. But what usually happens is that it will persist. So we'll get fever, and then our body fights it, and then it goes down. And then about 2 or 3 days later again, then we get high fever again. So we've got this constant spiking where the fever goes up, then it goes down. Then the fever goes up and fever goes down. Because generally that doesn't usually happen when you have a cold or flu. It will stay there. One of the treatments is coartem, all right, quite a successful treatment of malaria. So if you do know, all right, that you have malaria, obviously you need to treat it as soon as possible. It is not contagious, all right? What does that mean? If you have it, you're not going to give it to somebody else, like we saw with TB and what we saw with HIV. Malaria, if you get it, the mosquito bites you, what's in the mosquito is the plasmodium, and you have got that parasite inside of you that you need to be able to get rid of. All right, guys, that's all for now. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back, Life Sciences, from your wee break. I hope, as I said, you always need to stretch, get up, do some movement, get the blood flowing, go and have a drink of water or something, just so that the brain is nice and fresh. Just to recap on what we're looking at, remember we're looking at the kingdom Protists. And they're the very odd kingdom where we're going to see both plant and animal-like protists. Right, the animal ones are called protozoans, and we paid specific, right, attention to a parasitic plasmodium that causes malaria. Or we can have on the other side, we can have the more plant-like ones, and we call that algae. Guys, when it comes to questions on this section, yes, quite maybe you are asked to identify, right, maybe an algae or a protozoa, but very often the questions are related to malaria. Okay, very often they are database questions. You have to read from graphs, you have to read from tables, right? And that's sometimes quite nice to do because the answers are usually there. You just need to make sure that you are quite accurate. You read your questions carefully, right? And you follow, right? If you're given graphs, etc., that you follow with the ruler and you use everything. You're very accurate and you pay attention to it. Okay, so let's just have a look at one or two questions that, that could be asked on this section, right? And as I said to you, most of them are going to be concentrated on the disease, right, that the Plasmodium causes, which is going to be malaria. All right, guys, our first question is a little extract that we're giving you. So first of all, be very careful when you get things like this. Don't speed through it. Spend time, all right, read, see what it says. Don't miss the information. So it says that you must read the extract, and then underneath that there's a temperature chart. Oh, we're going to go back. There's a temperature chart, and that temperature chart, all right, is going to give us the information. So this, all right, all about a patient that is suffering from malaria. So let's read the question. The malaria parasite, all right, is caused by a unicellular organism called Plasmodium, okay? The parasite is transferred to humans by the Anopheles mosquito, and malaria symptoms only appear after 10 days when the first fever attack occurs. Now there's a little bit of information over there. It tells you that it's a unicellular Plasmodium, right, which tells you it's from the Protist kingdom. It tells you that it's, all right, transferred by the Anopheles mosquito, and probably the most important bit of information is that once, all right, malaria symptoms only appear 10 days after the first fever attack. So let's have a look what the chart looks like. Right, so if we have a look at the chart over here, right, what is it showing us? It's showing us on our x-axis the time, as you can see the days, and it's showing us on our y-axis our temperature. All right, so here we've got body temperature, and here we've got time of days. The first question is, to which group of microorganisms does Plasmodium belong? Guys, a nice simple warm-up question. And which group? Remember, which kingdom? So we know that it is the Protista. As I said to you, it tells you Plasmodium, and you need to know which kingdom it belongs to. Nice and easy first question. Next question. Name one tissue in the body that the malaria parasite attacks. Right, we know that it attacks two tissues, so obviously we would accept any of those. The one that it's going to do, right, is going to be blood, specifically the red blood cells. All right, that's going to be your first answer. And the second one, where was it that the malaria, all right, Plasmodium went? The first thing that it entered into the body is the liver. All right, so the first two answers, well, the first two questions are study questions. We didn't necessarily give you that information, so you need to be able to know, all right, certain characteristics of your disease. Okay, now we're going to use the chart because it says there from the chart. So you need to go to the chart to get the answer. And the first question is the highest temperature this patient experienced during the time period. So if we go to our graph, and this is where you use your ruler, guys. You're looking at temperature and you put your ruler down, right? And you make sure, because if you have a look here, if I draw a line over here, let me go over there, and I draw it, I know I'm not too accurate, all the way across, right there, you're going to see that if you draw a line, where is the highest peak? And if you have a look over there, if you draw your line nicely and straight, a little bit better than me, all right, you will notice, let's go back to the question, we're going to double check the question. Okay, we're just double checking what we have to look at, and we're looking for the highest temperature this patient experienced. So if I go back over here, all right, and I'm going to draw my line to approximately over here. So you've got to make sure Now look guys, it's between 40 and 41. That is your temperature. So you're going to probably put it in decimals. So your answer is definitely going to be 40. It cannot be 41 because that is not where it's reached, comma. And if you have a look at your line, it's probably round about over there. It's not halfway in between, so you've got to judge. Now, if you use your ruler and be much more accurate than me, you approximately, if I look, it's probably around about 40,3. You are not finished yet because 40,3 means absolutely nothing. When we talk about temperature, temperature has got units, so your answer must be 40,3 degrees Celsius. Do you see how it is when you're looking at over there? You've got to use your logic, right? You need to use your judgment and figure out approximately where it is going to be. Okay, so that was our first one, was the temperature. The next question was the number of fever attacks the patient experienced during the 5 days. And what is a fever attack? A fever attack is when our temperature rises above body temperature. So we're looking for spikes in the temperature, and we want to see how many spikes there are. So if we have a look, all right, at our graph, we have one spike over here, then our temperature goes down again. We have another spike over here, and then our temperature goes down again, and we have a third spike over there. All right, so if we were to answer our question, the number of fever attacks would just be 3. That's all we have to put, no units of measurement, because we're not looking at anything else. Now, the next question says, calculate on which day the patient could expect the start of the next fever attack. All right. In other words, do you see a pattern? So, we had a fever on day 11. We had a fever on day 13. And we had a fever on day 15. So if you look at the pattern, we have a fever every second day. So we've got 11, 13, 15, which means that the next fever attack is probably going to occur on the 17th day. All right, so calculate on which day it's going to be the 17th day. As you can see, all right, it happened, the fever spiked every second day. Nice and easy, all right, reading from the graph. All right, now let's have a look at the next question. And it says, suggest 3 ways. And remember where it says 3 ways, the marker is only going to mark the first 3 of preventing malaria. Now, if we think back, we close our eyes and we think of the slide. The first slide was spraying. All right. And we used, either we use in our country, we use DDT, or we use, all right, insecticides. All right, there we go. Another way we can use, all right, is nets. And those mosquito nets, all right, have been sprayed with insecticides, so it kills the mosquitoes, right? Also, it prevents the mosquitoes from biting us, right? Which leads us to the next question, all right? We can prevent the mosquito from biting, and we can use, all right, medicine. If it does bite, we can use, all right, mosquito repellent, right, anything to get the mosquito away. Right, so when we're looking at the concept here, what else could we use? We could have long sleeve clothes, all right, long sleeves, or we can wear long pants. Right. Any 3 ways in which we can see that either we're going to kill the mosquito, right, or we're going to prevent the mosquito from biting us. So spraying with insecticide, the insecticide nets, right, wearing long sleeves shirts or long pants so it stops, taking medicines to stop it from, right, invading our body, putting creams on, spraying in our room, all of those things, right, to be able to get rid of the mosquitoes. All right, guys, let's have a look at the next question. And as we start to read, it says, study the graph. So, oh, yummy. So maybe all the information is there for us, which shows the number of malaria cases. So we're looking at data again, and it's in the Limpopo province here in South Africa, which we know, right, is an area that is very nice and ideal conditions, all right, for mosquitoes. And we're looking at three particular years. Now, I want you to go to this graph that we have. Be very, very careful because we have 3 line graphs. And because we have 3 line graphs, it might look very confusing, but you must make sure when you read from the graph, you have the correct line. Okay, guys, so now we're going to look at the first question. And the first question asked us, in which month? So that's important. So we need to know a month, January, February, March, April, etc. And they've given us a year, 1999 to 2000. Right. And what do we have to get? The highest number of malaria cases. So if we have a look at the graph, the first thing we have to do is we need to look at the 1999 to 2000. Those are the big, thick, dotted lines. We must go to the highest number of cases. So that's the peak of the graph. So that's going to be over here. And we take our ruler and we draw a line all the way down to the bottom. And it's going to give us, all right, a month. And that is going to be November. So if we go back to our question, which month had the highest one? Right, your answer is then going to be November. All right, good. Let's go to our next question. The next question says, how many cases, right? So how many malaria cases were reported in the month of March? Okay, so we're looking at the cases. We're looking in March in 2000 to 2001. So let's go to our graph, right? First of all, we're going to look at 2000, 2001, small little dotted lines, right? We're going to the month of March. So we're going to the month of March, okay, and we go to March and we go up the one line, right? And then we go across to the other line because it wants to know the number of cases. So we read up to the dotted line over there, and then we go to the y-axis, and there we get the total of 500 cases. So if we look at how many cases were reported, right, it was 500. Read from your graph. It was backwards this time. All right. And our last question on this graph, it says, explain how an increase in the number of malaria infections could affect the South African economy. Guys, and this is what I say to you. This is the management. How can it affect us? Right, let's think economy. What does economy mean? Economy means money. So how is it going to affect us? So if people are sick, right, they're not working. So if they're not working, all right, what are they doing? They're not making money. What else? People have to go to the doctor if they are sick. So they're going to go to the hospitals. All right, so that means a lot of money, right, with medication, etc., at the hospitals. What else? If children are sick, what do? They don't go to school. If they don't go to school, they don't pass. And if they don't pass, they're not going to get a job. All right, and all of this is going to have a negative effect on the economy. All right, so if people are sick, they can't work. So that's the whole concept that you're looking at. If they can't work, they can't make money. If they don't have jobs, they're poor. They might need reliance on other members of the family. And those family members, right, that puts the pressure, etc. on them. Okay, guys, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.